Welcome back to Gentle Calm. There is a strange experience that many people live with for a long time before they ever say it out loud. Your life keeps moving, your days continue. You go where you need to go, you answer what needs answering, and from the outside, everything may look mostly normal. But somewhere underneath that, there is a quieter truth that is much harder to explain. You do not fully feel present in your own life. You are here, but it does not quite feel like you are here. You move through the day, but your experience of it feels thin, almost distant, as if something is separating you from the very hours you are living. Nothing necessarily looks dramatic. You may still be functioning, you may still be responsible. But inside, there is this unsettling sense that your life keeps happening without fully reaching you. That feeling can be deeply disorienting because this is not the same as simply being tired. It is not exactly stress, and it is not always sadness in the obvious sense. It is something more difficult to describe. It is the feeling of living your life without fully arriving inside it. You can go through an entire day and realize, by evening, that almost none of it felt real while it was happening. You were physically present for it. You were there for the conversations, there for the work, there for the small routines that make up ordinary life. But your inner experience stayed at a distance. It was as though the day passed near you instead of through you. That is what makes this so painful. It is one thing to struggle with life. It is another thing to feel removed from it while it is unfolding. That kind of removal creates a very private loneliness, because when you cannot feel your own life clearly, it becomes difficult to explain what is wrong. You may not be able to point to a single disaster. You may not have a neat reason. You only know that something about being alive has started to feel faint. A lot of people are carrying that feeling now. They describe it in different ways. They say they feel numb, disconnected, mentally far away, emotionally flat, or like they are simply going through the motions. But beneath all those different phrases is often the same core experience. Life no longer feels close enough to touch. That can happen gradually. Most of the time, it does not arrive all at once. It builds quietly over time. You get used to living at a certain speed. You get used to responding, adapting, pushing through, and staying occupied. You get used to overriding small signals from yourself because there is always something else to handle. You become good at continuing, and continuing can look healthy from the outside. It can look mature, it can look dependable, it can look like resilience. But there is a difference between continuing and actually inhabiting your own existence. One keeps you moving, the other allows you to feel that your life belongs to you while you are living it. When that second part goes missing, the days start to blur in a particular way. You may still remember what happened, but you do not remember feeling deeply present for it. You may have had a decent conversation, but it does not stay with you. You may have been somewhere beautiful, but the beauty did not really land. You may finish something important and feel almost no inner response. You may tell yourself that you should be more grateful, more awake, more engaged, but those instructions do not solve the problem. Because the problem is not that you do not know you have a life. The problem is that your experience of it has become dulled, and when life stops reaching you in a direct way, almost everything begins to feel flatter than it should. Ordinary pleasure becomes harder to access. Rest does not feel restorative in the way you hope it will. Achievement feels strangely empty. Even the moments that are supposed to make you feel something arrive muted, as if they are being filtered through layers of distance before they get to you. That distance changes the emotional texture of everything. You can start to feel as though you are performing your days rather than living them. You know what to say, you know what needs to be done, you know how to appear present enough. But inwardly, you feel half withdrawn. There is a part of you that never fully enters the room. This can be especially confusing for thoughtful people because thoughtful people often assume that awareness is the same as contact. It is not. You can understand yourself very well and still feel far away from your own life. You can know all the right language for what you are experiencing and still go through the day with a hollow sense that nothing is fully reaching your inner world. Insight is valuable, but insight alone does not guarantee aliveness. Sometimes a person becomes so good at explaining their experience that they barely notice they are no longer deeply inside it. That is a painful kind of adaptation. You become articulate about your patterns, but not intimate with your own existence. You can name what is happening, but naming it does not necessarily bring you back into direct contact with it. So you end up with a life that is highly interpreted but barely felt, and that is one reason this condition can last for so long. A person assumes that because they are reflecting, they must be connecting. Because they are self-aware, they must be present. Presence is more immediate than that. Presence is not only knowing what you feel, it is allowing experience to actually touch you while it is here. Many people have lost some of that capacity without realizing it. They have grown used to interruption, used to noise, used to always having something in the background, used to moving from one input to the next, used to filling every pause before the pause has a chance to show them anything. Over time, this can create a life that is full of activity and strangely empty of depth. You are exposed to many things, but very little sinks in. A meal is eaten while attention is elsewhere. A walk is taken, but the mind never arrives. A conversation happens, but part of you is already moving ahead to the next task. Music is playing, but you are barely hearing it. A whole afternoon disappears, and by evening, you cannot say you were really there for it in any meaningful way. This is not because you are broken. It is often because your inner world has been stretched too thin for too long. When a person is inwardly strained, they do not always react with visible emotion. Sometimes they react by becoming harder to reach. Life continues around them, but less of it gets through. What might look like indifference is often exhaustion that has gone quiet. What might look like passivity is sometimes a nervous system that no longer knows how to remain fully open. That matters because many people judge themselves harshly for this. They think they have become lazy toward life. They think they have lost their depth. They think something essential in them has disappeared. But often, what has disappeared is not depth. It is access. Their life is still there. Their emotional range is still there. Their capacity for meaning is still there. But they no longer feel in contact with those parts of themselves in the same immediate way. That is why trying to solve this with more stimulation often does not work. People sense that something has gone dim, so they go looking for something sharper. A new plan, a new routine, a new burst of input, a new wave of inspiration. They want something that will shock them back into feeling alive, and sometimes intensity does cut through the fog for a moment. But that is not the same as really returning to your life. Intensity can wake you up briefly, but it does not necessarily restore depth. In some cases, it actually makes the contrast worse, because once the intensity fades, ordinary life feels even harder to feel. This is why some people start needing extremes just to experience a sense of contact. A crisis makes them feel awake. A major change makes them feel awake. A dramatic ending or breakthrough makes them feel awake. But quieter forms of life begin to feel almost invisible to them. That is a difficult place to live from, because most of life does not come to us in dramatic forms. Most of life arrives quietly. It arrives through ordinary mornings, brief honest conversations, small signs of beauty, moments of physical relief, little experiences that ask not for analysis, but for attention. If your system can only register what is intense, you gradually lose sensitivity to what is subtle, and a person can lose a great deal that way. They stop noticing the calm that could have reached them. They stop feeling the dignity inside ordinary rituals. They stop receiving the emotional weight of simple moments. They begin to move through their own existence as if the only things that count are the things loud enough to interrupt them. But a meaningful life is not built only from interruption. It is also built from quiet contact, from moments that do not announce themselves as important, but become important because you were actually there for them. The warmth of a cup in your hand, a room finally becoming still in the evening, a sentence that reaches you at the right time, a conversation where you stop speaking automatically and say something true. These moments are not dramatic, but they are part of what makes a life feel inhabited. When that sense of inhabiting disappears, identity begins to blur in a new way. You start asking questions you might not have asked before. What am I actually feeling these days? What am I really connected to? When was the last time something felt fully real to me while it was happening? Where have I been all this time? Those questions can feel alarming, but they are also honest. They mark the moment where a person begins to notice the distance instead of simply living inside it. And that moment matters, because once you can feel that distance clearly, you are no longer completely asleep to it. That can become the beginning of return. Not a dramatic return, not a cinematic reinvention, not a sudden transformation into a more optimized person. A quieter return than that. The return begins when you stop treating your numbness as a moral failure and start seeing it as information. It begins when you ask what has been left unfelt for too long. It begins when you become curious about the pace you have been living at, the constant interruption you have accepted, the degree to which your days have become procedural rather than lived. And often, the answer is not that you need more complexity. Often, you need less distance. Less noise between you and your own experience. Less automatic reaching for distraction the second there is an opening. Less pressure to convert every feeling into language before you have even let yourself sit with it. Less habit of standing slightly outside your own life and commenting on it instead of entering it. That is one reason quiet can be so revealing. Not because quiet fixes everything, but because quiet removes some of what has been preventing you from noticing your own absence. In quiet, you may finally feel how far away you have been. In quiet, you may notice how quickly you want to escape the moment. In quiet, you may realize that what you have been calling boredom is sometimes just the beginning of contact with yourself. That can be uncomfortable, but discomfort is not always the enemy. Sometimes discomfort is the doorway back into reality. Sometimes it is the first sign that something is finally reaching you again, and what reaches you may be very simple at first. The sensation of sitting still without immediately fleeing into input. The feeling of your body finally registering how tired it actually is. The sound of a room at night. The realization that you have been lonely in a way you never fully admitted. The sudden sadness that appears when the distractions drop away. None of this is glamorous, but it is real, and real is what many people are missing. Not because their life is fake, but because their contact with it has become weak. This is why the deeper question is not always, how do I improve my life? Sometimes the deeper question is, how do I come back into relationship with the life I already have? That is a different kind of work. It is slower, less performative, less obsessed with visible change. It asks less for dramatic ambition and more for honest presence. It asks whether you can remain in the room long enough for something to reach you, whether you can stop skimming your own experience, whether you can begin to let ordinary life become audible again. That is not a small thing. To feel your own life again is not trivial. It changes the meaning of everything. A day becomes more than something to survive. Rest becomes more than collapse. Conversation becomes more than exchange. Your own emotions become more than inconvenience. Life regains texture, and texture matters. Without texture, everything starts to flatten into one long blur of obligation, entertainment, exhaustion, and recovery. But with texture, even a difficult life can begin to feel more real, more direct, more lived. You may still have pain, you may still have uncertainty, but at least you are no longer sealed off from your own existence while it is happening. That may be what so many people are really longing for. Not a completely different life, but deeper access to the one they already have. They want to feel the day when it is here. They want ordinary moments to have emotional weight again. They want to stop living at such a distance from themselves. They want to feel that they are not merely moving through time, but actually inside their own hours. And that is a worthy desire, because you were not meant to be a stranger to your own life. You were not meant to spend all your days in a half state where everything is happening and so little is arriving. You were not meant to confuse functioning with presence for so long that you forget the difference. At some point, something in you starts asking to come closer. Not closer to achievement, not closer to some ideal future self. Closer to what is here already, closer to the life that keeps waiting for you to enter it. Closer to the moments that are passing, whether you feel them or not. Maybe that is the invitation in all of this. Not to become more impressive, not to become permanently inspired, but to become reachable again, reachable by your own grief, reachable by your own relief, reachable by beauty, by fatigue, by truth, by silence, by whatever in your life has been trying to get your attention without force. That kind of return does not usually happen all at once. It happens in small restorations. You notice that a piece of music reaches you again. You notice that a conversation actually stays with you. You notice that for a few minutes, you were not mentally elsewhere. You notice the difference between being stimulated and being present. You notice that something in you has softened enough to receive the day. Those moments matter because each one breaks the spell a little. Each one reminds you that life is not only a list of things to manage. It is also an experience you are meant to have from the inside, and maybe that is where healing begins. Not in a dramatic breakthrough, but in the quiet return of contact. If this resonated with you, subscribe to Gentle Calm. This channel is for people who are tired of feeling removed from their own days and want to come back into a more honest, lived relationship with themselves. If you want to go deeper, the Gentle Calm books, the Daily Reset Journal, and the Substack are linked below. And if this video stayed with you, let me know in the comments. When did you first start feeling distant from your own life? Thank you, and stay calm.